Welcome to Margin Notes from the Central Church of Christ in Paducah, Kentucky. As you can see, this video covers an introduction of the Old Testament book of Ruth. This will be a very brief video because, well, Ruth is a very short book, but it is long enough at 4 chapters that we want to take a video to cover the introduction and a video to cover the text itself. And so the series, if you will, on Ruth will just be 2 videos in length. If this is the first time you've watched Margin Notes, let me give you a couple of updates. One is we just finished the book of Judges last time, and we're rolling those two things together. And if you're familiar with Margin Notes, you know what that means. That means we do our follow-up video. It will cover Judges and Ruth, because Ruth tells us that's when it occurred, was during that time period. And also, if you're just joining us, well, you're joining us near the end, because Ruth will be the last book of the Bible that we cover on Margin Notes. But if you go back in our archives on Facebook or YouTube, you can find where we have covered fully Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. It will be Ruth. From the Old Testament, we've also done 25 Psalms. We also have done in the New Testament the very brief book of Philemon, as well as 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And so a lot of notes through books of the Bible, and we'll have more to say about finishing up Margin Notes at the end of our next video, which will cover the text of the book of Ruth. But for now, let's look at this introduction to Ruth again. This will be a fairly short video. We always want to encourage you to put some things before the text of the book itself, just to remind you of what's going on, or sort of the surrounding information. Here's what I have as far as some introductory material. Who wrote the book of Ruth? We don't know, and there's not really a great consensus. What a lot of commentators I've looked at is basically what I have there. What they say is Samuel is possible, and it makes a whole lot of sense. If Samuel is the author, but we don't know. It's not signed. I don't know Hebrew, so I can't say, hey, the Hebrew is similar to Samuel. I don't know. But the key is we don't know, but Samuel seems likely. Who was it written to originally? Well, very obviously, post-Judges Israel. In other words, look at how horrible it was during the time of the Judges, but there were also some glimmering signs of hope, including these individuals found in this very short book, Ruth, Boaz, Naomi, and others, who at least most of the time were trying to do what was right during their time, during the point of Judges. When it was written, if Samuel wrote it, it would seem almost certain, somewhere around the transition from Saul to David, probably early in David's reign. But even if Samuel didn't write it, scholars suggest it probably was still right around that time. Somewhere in the Saul to David transition makes a whole lot of sense as far as a time frame for the writing of the book. So roughly 1000 BC, but somewhere in that time frame around the beginning of the reign of David. Why was this book written? Well, a lot of reasons, but I think the most obvious one is to show God's providential care, even in a dark period of history. And I have there sort of not a key verse, but a key reference for that purpose, as in chapter 2 and verse 12. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That's Boaz speaking, by the way, to Ruth. There are no miracles in this book, but God's providential care is very clearly seen. And so even during the horrible time, the time of Judges, God was still looking out for the faithful, and this book is meant to reflect that after we've come through just the depths in the book of Judges. Obviously, it's an Old Testament book. You may never want to write that down. I just always like to have it as this Old Testament or New Testament. And then what period, and if you're new to Margin Notes, Brother Andy Kaiser wrote an excellent book many years ago called The 15 Periods of Bible History. That's where these lists come from. The whole book of Ruth fits, or Judges, of Ruth fits during the time of the Judges. The text itself tells us that in Judges chapter 1 and verse 1. The key words of the book are all very similar. Maybe the key word is the word redeem, which is found 4 times in the book. You also find the word rest in the book, sort of ironically 4 times. And by the way, it's totally coincidence that these start with R. I promise. It's not a preacher thing. And then the Hebrew word goel, which is translated different ways. redeemers, relatives, kinsmen. I should have put that on there as well. It's found 7 times. If you sort of look at those 3 words, you kind of have the outline of the book, or the theme of the book going throughout. If you've read the book of Ruth, you're saying you're already thinking, yeah, that's what's in this book. It's only 4 chapters, so you kind of can remember the story quite well. So the word redeem, or similar words, the word rest, and then some form of redeemers, relatives, kinsmen. From that, most people don't know any Hebrew words, but sometimes they'll hear Bible classes or sermons on the book of Ruth. They'll make sure to mention Goel, which is found 7 times in this book. An outline of the book of Ruth, and this is a combination of a couple that I've found that I really, really like. And they go exactly by the chapter breaks. And most people who outline the book of Ruth suggest that the chapter breaks are really good. In other words, it's one of those places where you do have a natural break in the narrative between each chapter, so it reads very well in that way. Uh, the chapters were not inspired. In other words, the chapter breaks were inspired. But in this book, they fit very well. So, chapter 1, point 1 from chapter 1, Ruth's resolve, which is found in her statement, I will go. Chapter 2, point 2, Ruth's resolve, which is make from her statement, let me glean. Point 3 from chapter 3, Ruth's request, where she says to Boaz, redeem me. And then chapter 4, Ruth's reward, a son was born to her named Obed. Now, the only caveat to this outline is chapter 4. Because the text specifically says a son was born to Naomi, even though Ruth had the child. And I will say this: you can read the book of Ruth, and I encourage you to do this. Um, it takes some mental work, but you can read the book of Ruth with Naomi as the main character, and I really challenge you to do that. I read that one time where somebody suggested that, and so I've really tried to read the book of Ruth from both perspectives a number of times, and it really does add some different nuance. And that comes out in that point in chapter 4 where it says a son is born to Naomi. But we know Ruth had the child, and so just to make the outline flow, we call it Ruth's reward, where a son is born to her and she names him Obed. So as we said, this is a brief video just introducing this very short book. Next time, we will come back and go through the 4-chapter text of the book of Ruth with a few notes that you may find encouraging. We hope these very brief notes to introduce the book have helped you. I love the book of Ruth. People ask me, what's your favorite book of the Bible? Ruth isn't at the top of the list, but I'm telling you it's near it. I love this little book. And it's, I'll be honest, this is one of the hardest, when I've come to making the notes for these videos, I've thought, okay, save some stuff for your own personal Bible study and save some stuff for sermons, because I want to just share so much. I love this little book. But we'll come back next time and share, 2 weeks' time, to share some notes from the text itself. Make sure you watch that video and go back and watch all our previous videos. And as always, Margin Notes encourages you to read the Bible, study the Bible, and live the Bible. Thanks for watching.